A question that no doubt any fan of late Roman history has been thinking about, who at the same time is interested in urban history and architecture, is which city was more impressive during its prime, Rome or Constantinople? The old Rome, the cradle of the Roman Empire, where the whole story had started, or the new Rome, Nova Roma, the city of Constantine, Constantinople, formerly known as Byzantium. In this video, we are going to try to answer that question, and even though this is a highly subjective topic, we are still going to try to quantify certain aspects of those two impressive cities in order to find out which city must have been more impressive during their primes, the old Rome or the new Rome. So then, let this epic showdown of the two most impressive cities of the Roman Empire begin. One of the most fascinating things about the late Roman Empire is how the city of Rome transformed over the many centuries of Roman rule, and how then in the late empire, two cities had become the largest cities of that empire. In the west, even after the imperial seat had been moved from Rome, first to Mediolanum in 286 AD by Maximian, and then to Ravenna in 402 AD by Honorius, Rome still remained the largest city and the symbolic capital of the Roman Empire. In fact, in this video here, we showed that Rome became again the true capital of the Western Empire for a while in the last decades of its existence, from 450 AD onwards. And we have also established that architecturally, Rome had reached its peak in 320 AD. This means Rome had reached its largest extent by inhabitants, by land area, but also by the number of impressive architectural buildings. It was during that time, when Rome had reached its very peak, that the Emperor Constantine created his new capital on the site of the city of Byzantium at the Bosphorus. This new city of Constantinople thus would see its birth when the old Rome had reached its zenith, and it would in turn reach its zenith around 100 years after the Western Empire had fallen. But which city would have been more impressive? If we would have a time machine and could travel to Rome of the year 320 AD and to Constantinople of the year 540 AD, which city would have been more splendorous and impressive? Well, let us compare a few metrics here. First, urban area. Both cities were divided into 14 regions, and we have very good surviving documents that give us lots of details. For Rome, we have the Notitia Urbis Romae and the Curiosum Urbis Romae, and for Constantinople, we have the Notitia Urbis Constantinopolitae. Both cities were gigantic for their times, unrivaled, and stretching several kilometers in each direction. Let us now start with Rome. Rome was entirely surrounded by land on all sides, and the land area surrounded by the Aurelian walls of Rome was 14 square kilometers. However, by the early 4th century, the city had grown so large that it stretched beyond the Aurelian walls. Some archaeological estimates put out a figure of about 20 to a maximum of 25 square kilometers of total urbanized surface land area. Large areas beyond the Aurelian walls were, for example, the Ianiculum and the area around St. Peter's Basilica that had been constructed under Constantine. Also, along the Via Appia and in the countryside surrounding Rome, there were many villas of rich aristocrats. The urban layout of Constantinople was entirely different. It was built on a peninsula and thus mostly surrounded by sea, except to the west, where it was protected by the imposing Theodosian land walls that would save the city many times from being sacked. Further to the east, the old Constantinian walls acted as a second layer of defense. The urban area enclosed by the Constantinian walls was 6 square kilometers, and the area enclosed by the Theodosian land walls was 14 square kilometers. Interestingly, this is exactly the same surface area that was encompassed by the Aurelian walls of Rome. To the north, on the other side of the sea, there was an additional small quarter known as the Sykai. By contrast to Rome, archaeological evidence points to the area between the Constantinian and Theodosian land walls not being densely populated. It is believed that the city never fully reached the Theodosian land walls in most parts, and that there was some kind of green belt between these massive two walls and the buildings of the city. Therefore, the urbanized land area of Constantinople was smaller than that of Rome during their respective peaks. So Rome wins here. And please like this video and subscribe, and also turn on the bell so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And if you want to suggest video topics of your own, participate in polls, chat with other enthusiasts of the Roman Empire, or participate in exclusive live streams with me or our team, you can gain these perks by supporting our work on Patreon or via becoming a YouTube member. Thanks to your support, we will be able to explore many different topics of the late Roman Empire. Gratias a tibi, amici. Second, inhabitants. Reconstructing the number of inhabitants of both Rome and Constantinople during their primes poses a big challenge for modern archaeologists. The number is usually reconstructed by going through surviving records of how much grain was shipped to Rome and Constantinople respectively. From the amount of supplied grain, the population can be deducted. Similarly, the amount of supplied meat, such as pork, is also often being found in records and used as a metric to reconstruct the number of inhabitants. It is current scholarly consensus that Rome had a peak population of around 1 million people, and that number remained quite constant for hundreds of years. From shortly before the time of Augustus, so around the birth of Christ, to 320 AD, Rome had a population of around 1 million people. By 410 AD, the population had dropped to 800,000, and by 450 AD, it had been only half of its peak at around 500,000 inhabitants. Only in the second half of the 5th century did the population really start to dwindle dramatically, going down to between 100 and 150,000 by 500 AD and to an insanely low 30,000 by 600 AD. Constantinople, by contrast, never reached a population of 1 million inhabitants. This is logical since we have established that the urbanized surface land area was smaller than that of Rome, with a maximum of 14 square kilometers, as compared to Rome's urban area that, as we said, was larger than 14 square kilometers, possibly between 20 to 25 square kilometers. Modern archaeological estimates for Constantinople's population vary between 400,000 as a lower bound and 800,000 as an upper bound, with most scholars agreeing on a figure of 500 or 600,000 inhabitants during its peak. The zenith of Constantinople was during the age of Justinian, before the plague hit, so in 540 AD. The city had then reached its zenith at a likely figure of 600,000 inhabitants. First the plague from 541 onwards, and then the loss of Egypt and the Levant after 640 to the Arab conquerors, and thus the stop of grain shipments from these regions led to a population decline in Constantinople. By the later 7th century, the population must have already dropped considerably to not even half the population it had during its peak. By 700 AD, the city probably didn't even reach 200,000 inhabitants anymore. There was a brief resurgence around the year 1000, where the population was larger again, but it never again reached its peak population. Contrary to many modern depictions, the population of Constantinople in 1453, when it fell to the Turks, was only between 30 and 60,000 people. By that time, Constantinople was an impoverished city where many of the old monuments had already lain in ruins for hundreds of years, and many parts of the city having been deserted ghost quarters. So population-wise, Rome also wins. 3. Monuments. From the aforementioned 2 documents, we get many details on how impressive both cities must have been. According to these sources, Rome had 8 bridges over the Tiber, 19 aqueducts, 4,000 statues, 1,797 private palaces or domus, a few imperial palaces, actually one giant imperial palace complex on the Palatine Hill, and 46,602 apartment buildings called insulae. The city boasted truly magnificent buildings such as the Amphitheatrum Flavium, countless temples, the largest one having been the Temple of Venus and Roma, 856 small baths, 11 gigantic public baths, 28 public libraries, dozens of private libraries, many circuses, the largest one being the Circus Maximus, many amphitheaters, and 24 churches. Even in the year 500 AD, Rome must have been quite impressive, since the African monk Fulgentius exclaimed after visiting the city in that year, "How wonderful must be the heavenly Jerusalem if this earthly city can survive so greatly." But Constantinople must have also been extremely impressive. The city boasted 5 imperial palaces, 14 churches, 8 public baths, 153 private baths, 4 imperial foras, 2 senate houses, 2 theaters, 4 harbors, 4 cisterns, 4 nymphaea, 4,388 domus or private palaces, 1 colossus, 1 circus, the giant hippodrome, and a few temples in the old Capitolium of the former Byzantium. We don't know how many insulae there were, but probably less than in Rome. However, Constantinople clearly wins with regard to domus, having had more than twice as many as Rome. But we can assume that many domus in Rome lay outside of Rome and not in the city proper itself. Since many numbers are not comparable, for example, the Notitia Urbis Constantinopolitae doesn't tell us how many statues Constantinople had, we cannot really compare the 2 cities in a neutral manner, as had been possible with, for example, land area and inhabitants. We can agree that both cities must have been utterly impressive in their respective primes. But Rome wins regarding the sheer size of the buildings. Rome had the larger amphitheaters, the Colosseum clearly wins. The larger temples, since Constantinople mostly only had the old temples of the Acropolis of Byzantium. Rome also had the larger Colossus, the larger public baths, with the baths of Diocletian and Caracalla being unrivaled, the larger and more numerous aqueducts, the larger basilicas and the larger circuses, with the Circus Maximus being quite larger than the Hippodrome. But we must also note that Constantinople wins in some other areas. Constantinople had the Hagia Sophia, which certainly was the largest and most impressive church building, dwarfing any in Rome, and surpassing most other buildings in Rome by interior volume. Constantinople also wins with its insanely impressive and massive land walls that were much more elaborate and more fortified as compared to the Aurelian walls. It had also a strategic advantage due to its unique geography, thus being able to withstand sieges much better, as the city could be supplied with food by sea, even during land sieges. The city also had ports, which Rome obviously didn't, giant cisterns, which Rome also didn't, and impressive sea walls, which Rome obviously also didn't. Therefore, I would say that this is a tie, because we cannot quantify the splendor of both cities. They both must have been a sight to behold unlike any other, each one in its own way. Rome as the old pagan capital, with its pagan roots still very clearly visible, even as late as 500 AD, and Constantinople, the Christian capital with the largest church of Christianity. I thus don't want to proclaim a clear winner. For me, both Rome and Constantinople are absolute winners, and you can decide which city was more splendorous and impressive in the comment section. Let me know what you think. I am already looking forward to your comments. And if you are interested in how Rome must have looked some decades after the fall, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in how Rome must have looked in 476 AD, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history and to all who are like me absolutely fascinated by the late Roman Empire. Gratias amici imperii Romani, and bene vale.